It begins with sound, a high-pitched snarl that cuts through the noise of the world, a mechanical heartbeat born for motion. It's the kind of machine that doesn't just move. It transforms movement into language, telling stories of human precision, courage, and obsession. On the surface, it looks like speed incarnate, but beneath the carbon and titanium lies a far more interesting truth. How far we'll go to chase perfection. Every pivot, every millisecond, every choice is calculated and costly. This is where engineering becomes art, and art becomes a weapon, an instrument that redefined the limits of its sport and the riders brave enough to command it. Today, we're unpacking that story in full. The machine that turned MotoGP's modern era into a test of nerve, intellect, and adaptability. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which legendary racer or machine we should explore next. The Honda RC213V marked a turning point, not just for its manufacturer, but for the entire philosophy of modern MotoGP. When the 1000cc era dawned in 2012, the RC213V emerged as Honda's answer to a question that had been building for years. How do you harness monumental power without letting it destroy the rider who wields it? To understand its creation, we need to rewind to the close of the 800cc era, a time when power delivery had become almost too civilized, and riders complained that electronics had sterilized the thrill of racing. Honda engineers, known for their methodical obsession, decided that the next generation wouldn't just push boundaries, it would erase them entirely. They started with a clean sheet, developing a V4 engine with brutal acceleration, designed to deliver torque instantly yet controllably. The RC213V was a study in balance, mechanical ferocity countered by electronic precision. Every part, from the seamless shift gearbox to the mass-centralized chassis, was engineered to make the impossible manageable. The goal was simple to state and nearly impossible to achieve: total domination under control. The men behind the RC213V weren't building for glamour. They were building to win. Honda's racing culture has always treated technology as the extension of willpower. At the heart of the project was a desire to prove that even in a world governed by sensors and data, human skill could still make the difference. The team's internal discussions often revolved around one principle: predictability. A race bike should never surprise its rider. That meant designing every mechanical and electronic component to communicate clearly, giving feedback through the handlebars and the rear tire rather than through flashing warning lights. Honda's engineers achieved this by creating an ultra-compact V4 engine configuration that concentrated weight toward the center of gravity, allowing the RC213V to pivot faster and change direction with uncanny agility. Riders described it as an extension of the body rather than a separate entity, precisely what Honda intended. But perfection always comes at a price. The RC213V was an unforgiving machine for anyone who didn't understand it. Where other manufacturers chased ease of use, Honda built a bike that demanded trust and aggression. Its power curve was relentless, and the chassis, stiff, precise, and brutally honest, punished hesitation. For seasoned racers, it was exhilarating. For those who couldn't sync with its rhythm, it was exhausting. Still, early tests showed promise. Casey Stoner, Honda's headline rider during development, praised the bike's acceleration and front-end feel. He had spent years battling understeer issues on other bikes, and now with the RC213V, he found something rare: a front tire that told him exactly what was happening at every lean angle. That confidence allowed him to push harder, and Honda engineers used his feedback to fine-tune every component. When the RC213V made its official debut, the MotoGP paddock took notice. It wasn't just the top speed or the lap times, it was the way the bike behaved in the hands of skilled riders. It seemed to rewrite the rules of corner entry, combining the grip of a superbike with the fluid motion of a smaller displacement racer. Honda's seamless shift gearbox became a critical advantage, reducing instability during downshifts and allowing riders to stay on the throttle longer. In the fiercely competitive world of MotoGP, milliseconds make legends, and the RC213V was engineered to carve those milliseconds out of physics itself. Behind the scenes, Honda's testing program was relentless. Tracks across Japan and Europe became laboratories for iteration. Engineers tested frame stiffness in micrometers, recalibrated electronics in real time, and experimented with different swing arm lengths to manage the bike's wild acceleration. The RC213V wasn't simply developed. It was sculpted through feedback loops between rider instinct and computational precision. This philosophy, human-guided data, would later define Honda's entire racing identity in the decade that followed. Yet the challenge for any racing machine is not creation, it's evolution. The RC213V entered a sport that was rapidly shifting under the influence of electronic rider aids, unified software regulations, and new tire characteristics. Honda's engineers had to anticipate these changes and design flexibility into the bike's DNA. The V4 layout offered that adaptability, giving them room to adjust weight distribution, intake geometry, and gearbox ratios without redesigning the entire platform. This modularity proved crucial in keeping the RC213V competitive year after year. Culturally, the RC213V reflected something deeper within Honda. The company's racing branch, HRC, Honda Racing Corporation, has always approached MotoGP not just as competition, but as a proving ground for engineering ethics. Every innovation was tied to a belief in discipline, consistency, and respect for the rider's craft. The RC213V was, in many ways, an embodiment of that ethos. Its clean, purposeful design mirrored Honda's road-going philosophy: function first, emotion through performance. That's why even from a distance it looked different, compact, taut, and businesslike. It wasn't sculpted for showrooms or posters. It was built to execute. For owners and collectors, the RC213VS, a limited street-legal version released later, became the ultimate symbol of that intent. It was an invitation to experience MotoGP engineering in the real world, albeit at a staggering price and with limitations that made it more art piece than daily rider. Still, those who managed to acquire one discovered something transcendent. Even at street speeds, the precision of throttle response and the surgical control of its chassis made it feel like piloting pure engineering thought. It wasn't about comfort. It was about connection. The same connection Honda's race engineers pursued on the track. In the end, the RC213V's story is as much about philosophy as it is about hardware. It represented a choice to build uncompromising performance, even when the market demanded accessibility. Honda wasn't chasing fashion. It was chasing truth in motion. Every curve of the frame, every line of code in the electronics, and every data point logged on the test bench was directed toward one outcome: mastery of the unpredictable. And while that pursuit demanded enormous investment and unrelenting discipline, it created something rare, a motorcycle that distilled the essence of MotoGP into tangible form. As we move forward, the next phase of this story will reveal what happens when the perfect machine meets a rider bold enough to test its limits, and what that union meant for the future of racing. The Honda RC213V became inseparable from one name in particular, Marc Marquez. From his debut in 2013, it was clear that the young Spaniard and the RC213V were a perfect storm waiting to happen. The motorcycle had already proven itself fast and fierce, but Marquez unlocked a dimension that even Honda's engineers hadn't fully anticipated. He rode it beyond the limits of conventional geometry, sliding both wheels through corners, breaking deep into the apex, and extracting performance in ways that rewrote MotoGP physics. The RC213V in his hands wasn't just a machine, it was an extension of reflex and instinct. Yet this symbiosis was as volatile as it was spectacular, reshaping how teams, rivals, and regulators viewed the boundaries of control. As the RC213V evolved through the mid-2010s, its dominance reshaped the MotoGP landscape. Rivals scrambled to match its blend of brute power and responsive handling, but many missed the secret. It wasn't only the hardware. Honda's electronics suite, honed through thousands of test laps, offered a delicate balance between intervention and freedom. Riders could slide and drift under braking, while the system subtly caught the edge before catastrophe. Marquez used that balance like a scalpel, his body hanging impossibly low, elbows scraping tarmac, the RC213V whispering feedback through every vibration. To fans, it looked supernatural. To engineers, it was data come to life. But such a tight coupling between rider and machine carried risk. The more the bike adapted to Marquez's daring, the less it suited anyone else. By 2016, this tension had become the RC213V's defining paradox. On paper, it was the best bike on the grid. On track, it was unrideable for most. Honda's other riders struggled with unpredictable front-end grip and aggressive power delivery. Engineers chased solutions, softening chassis stiffness, revising engine mapping, and experimenting with weight distribution. Still, The RC213V remained a specialist's weapon. Marquez thrived, winning multiple titles while teammates fought just to stay upright. In MotoGP's era of spec tires and standardized software, such imbalance was unusual, and it highlighted a fundamental truth. Honda had built a motorcycle so finely tuned to one man's style that it couldn't easily be replicated. The RC213V was a masterpiece and a trap. The rivalry dynamics only intensified this perception. Other manufacturers began producing bikes that prioritized consistency and user-friendliness over pure aggression. As a result, more of their riders could fight for podiums, while Honda's hopes rested largely on Marquez's shoulders. Every victory reaffirmed the brilliance of the RC213V, but every crash hinted at its danger. The margin for error was razor-thin. Honda's engineers didn't see this as failure. To them, it was the cost of perfection. The RC213V embodied Honda's competitive DNA: high risk, high reward, relentless refinement. Still, whispers grew louder around the paddock. Was Honda too dependent on a single superstar? The technical evolution of the RC213V through these years mirrored the changing face of MotoGP itself. Regulations shifted toward more standardized electronics and tire allocations, limiting the freedom that once gave manufacturers their unique edge. For Honda, this meant rethinking how to retain identity within tighter constraints. The RC213V's development became a chess match between creativity and compliance. Engineers sought new gains in aerodynamics, seamless gearboxes, and swing arm flexibility. The carbon fiber components grew lighter, the engine internals more compact, the ECU algorithms more predictive. Each iteration aimed to maintain Honda's traditional strengths: corner entry stability, explosive acceleration, and precision steering, while taming the violent tendencies that alienated less aggressive riders. In the US, fans followed this saga closely. American audiences, with a deep love of both technology and competition, saw the RC213V as a symbol of engineering audacity. Even those who didn't follow MotoGP religiously could appreciate what it represented: a manufacturer pushing the limits of human control and technological possibility. In garages across the country, replica liveries and RC213V-inspired modifications appeared on track bikes and custom builds. It was the MotoGP machine that defined a generation, influencing everything from sport bike ergonomics to suspension tuning philosophies. Honda's reputation for precision, long associated with reliability and restraint, now carried a new connotation: danger, power, and the thrill of mastery. As Marquez continued his reign, the RC213V's legend grew, but so did its fragility. The 2019 season showcased its peak: unmatched speed, devastating corner entry, and near-flawless execution. Yet behind the scenes, riders and engineers alike knew they were walking a tightrope. The bike's violent front-end reactions during sudden braking required immense physical control. It demanded a riding style that was both fearless and counterintuitive: front-heavy braking combined with aggressive rear rotation. Marquez's injuries in subsequent years, particularly the crash in 2020 that sidelined him for months, exposed the dark side of this design philosophy. Without its master pilot, the RC213V struggled to find stability. Honda's once dominant machine became unpredictable and difficult to manage. And the brand that had once defined the modern era suddenly found itself chasing balance instead of supremacy. Still, the RC213V's shadow loomed large over the sport. Every manufacturer borrowed lessons from its triumphs and failures. The seamless shift gearbox became standard across the grid. Aerodynamic downforce packages grew more intricate, and the conversation about electronics evolved from restraint to symbiosis. The RC213V had proven that technology and rider could coexist in harmony, but also that the bond could become dependency. It forced MotoGP to reckon with the cost of progress. Was the future about making bikes easier for everyone or faster for the few who dared? That debate, ignited by Honda's masterpiece, would shape the next decade of competition. What made the RC213V truly remarkable was its refusal to conform. In an age where algorithms dictate safety and predictability, it remained unapologetically raw. The bike didn't adapt to the rider. The rider had to adapt to it. This dynamic filtered into every corner of MotoGP culture, redefining what fans expected from racing heroes. It wasn't just about talent, it was about the willingness to wrestle chaos into control. Marquez embodied that, and so did the RC213V. Together, they created not just victories but mythology. Yet, as every era ends, the same question always returns. What comes after perfection? By the early 2020s, Honda faced a crossroads. The RC213V was still fast, still potent, but the sport had moved toward broader competitiveness. Other manufacturers had built machines that offered performance with accessibility, making their entire rider lineups more effective. Honda's once fearsome edge had dulled, not because of decline, but because the RC213V's philosophy was too pure, too specific, too tied to one extraordinary individual. And so began the next chapter in this machine story, where legacy and reinvention would collide to decide its true place in MotoGP history. The Honda RC213V entered the 2020s facing a challenge no algorithm or dyno sheet could solve: the absence of Marc Marquez. Without its singular pilot, the bike's brilliance became its burden. The RC213V's character, so precisely aligned with Marquez's aggressive inputs and reflexive control, suddenly felt alien in the hands of other riders. Front-end instability, unpredictable power delivery, and brutal corner behavior returned to the forefront. What had once been a weapon became a puzzle. Honda's engineers found themselves staring at the very creation they'd perfected, now asking a new question. How do you evolve a legend without erasing what made it legendary? The RC213V's post-Marquez seasons revealed the truth behind its engineering DNA. Built for razor-sharp control and lightning reflexes, it demanded a riding style most couldn't sustain. Honda's test teams worked relentlessly, softening chassis rigidity, adjusting the crankshaft's rotational inertia, and fine-tuning aerodynamics to broaden its usability. Yet the deeper issue was philosophical. The RC213V wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a system optimized for a single input. Every line of data, every suspension pivot, every traction control calibration had been sculpted around Marquez's rhythm. Without him, it was like trying to run someone else's heartbeat. Riders who came after struggled to find connection. Some described the front tire as mute. Others found the acceleration unpredictable. The RC213V had become a paradox of precision, too perfect for anyone but the one it was built for. Still, within that struggle, something profound emerged. Honda began to reconsider what performance really meant. The RC213V's difficulties forced engineers to reevaluate their hierarchy of priorities. Was absolute speed the goal, or sustainable competitiveness across multiple riders? This internal reckoning shaped Honda's next generation of racing philosophy. New electronics packages were developed, aimed at giving more adaptable throttle response. The chassis was redesigned for forgiveness rather than rigidity. Aerodynamic downforce became a tool for stability rather than aggression. And through it all, the RC213V remained the benchmark, a constant reminder of how high Honda had once set the bar and how difficult it was to stay there. In broader context, the RC213V's evolution mirrored the maturing of MotoGP itself. The sport was transitioning from an era of individual dominance to one of collective competitiveness. Rules around aerodynamics, fuel limits, and unified electronics narrowed the gap between teams. What once separated Honda from others, its technical superiority and deep R&D resources, was no longer enough. The RC213V's razor-edge philosophy needed translation into a language of balance. For Honda, that meant learning humility in a discipline it had long mastered. The same factory that had defined MotoGP's modern era now found itself studying the strengths of others, searching for lessons in flexibility. And yet, the RC213V's legend endured. Fans around the world still regarded it as the most visceral expression of Honda's racing soul. The sound of its V4 engine, the twitch of its chassis at full lean, and the unmistakable sight of its lean angles became symbols of MotoGP's golden decade. The RC213V had transcended statistics. It had become mythology. For engineers, it was proof that the pursuit of perfection comes with consequences. For riders, it was a reminder that some machines demand not mastery, but devotion. The bike didn't want to be tamed. It wanted to be understood. Collectors and historians will one day look back at the RC213V as both apex and turning point. In the same way that Honda's earlier racing icons defined their generations, this machine marked the boundary between mechanical dominance and digital intelligence. Its seamless gearbox, predictive electronics, and mass centralized design became blueprints for future development across all of MotoGP. Even rival manufacturers adopted philosophies born from its success and its failure. The RC213V had taught the paddock that speed is meaningless without communication between man and machine. Every subsequent MotoGP innovation, adaptive traction systems, real-time telemetry adjustments, aerodynamic bodywork, owed a quiet debt to Honda's pioneering gamble. As the RC213V's competitive peak passed, its legacy shifted from winning races to shaping minds. It became the subject of engineering dissertations, simulation models, and museum exhibits. Track day enthusiasts sought to capture even fragments of its DNA through replicas and modified production bikes. And in Honda's own R&D corridors, lessons from the RC213V fed directly into the evolution of future street models. The CBR line's refined electronics, the road-legal RC213VS, and even the next generation of Fireblade carried echoes of that MotoGP masterpiece. Its influence rippled far beyond racing circuits. It changed how Honda built motorcycles, how it thought about control, and how it defined the limits of speed. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the Honda RC213V isn't technical, it's human. It's about the symbiosis between creation and creator, about how a machine can both elevate and expose the limits of the people who build and ride it. The RC213V proved that even in the age of computation, instinct still matters. That the perfect lap isn't just the product of sensors and code, but of intuition, courage, and the ability to dance on the edge of disaster. And that, more than anything, is why its legend continues to resonate. It represents a moment when technology and human will met in perfect, volatile harmony, never fully controlled, never fully understood, yet impossible to forget. So, as the story of the Honda RC213V continues to evolve in MotoGP's ever-changing landscape, one truth remains constant. No machine has ever captured the delicate balance between chaos and control quite like this one. It's not just a motorcycle, it's a testament to obsession, innovation, and the eternal human desire to build something that transcends its own purpose. The RC213V may no longer dominate every race, but its spirit lives on in every corner where risk meets precision, and every engineer still brave enough to chase perfection, knowing how much it costs. The Honda RC213V has now reached a stage where its story must be measured not by trophies, but by transformation. In its prime, it wasn't just another entry on the MotoGP grid, it was a symbol of how far engineering could stretch the human boundary of control. But as time passed, it also revealed how narrow that boundary can become. For modern enthusiasts and collectors, understanding the RC213V is like studying a masterpiece that still bears the fingerprints of its painter. It represents a decade of innovation that reshaped not only MotoGP, but the entire philosophy of high-performance motorcycle design. For US viewers, the Honda RC213V's legacy is surprisingly tangible. While few will ever see or touch the true factory prototype, its influence flows directly into bikes available on American roads. The RC213VS, a limited street-legal iteration, remains one of the rarest and most expensive production motorcycles ever built, costing as much as a small home when new, and appreciating steadily in collector circles. It distilled the RC213V's engineering into something barely restrained by legality, a 9999 CV4 producing around 200 horsepower, with chassis geometry and electronics derived directly from MotoGP. Those who've ridden it describe it as brutally precise, demanding total focus, but endlessly rewarding for those who learn its rhythm. Even Honda's more attainable sport bikes, like the Fireblade and CBR models, carry lessons from this lineage: tighter mass centralization, more predictive electronics, and that same sense of purity between throttle and tire. In today's market, the RC213V's spirit still resonates. For riders who value precision over excess and craft over convenience, the influence is unmistakable. Honda's newer racing programs and production bikes reflect lessons from the RC213V's trials: balance over brute force, adaptability over specialization. The company learned, often painfully, that perfection tailored to one rider can become limitation for the rest. In that humility lies growth, and it's what keeps Honda relevant even as MotoGP's competitive order evolves. Every race since the RC213V's debut has been, in some way, a response to it, whether in copying its strategies, countering its strengths, or compensating for its flaws. From an ownership perspective, the RC213VS remains a technical marvel, but a practical challenge. Its maintenance demands are astronomical, its availability microscopic, and its purpose singular: to demonstrate what's possible when racing DNA is brought to the street. For most enthusiasts, its value lies in what it represents rather than how it rides. The RC213V is a reminder that technology, when pushed to its limits, becomes a reflection of the people who built it, ambitious, stubborn, and always chasing an ideal that can't quite be reached. That's what separates machines like this from mere products. They define eras, inspire generations, and set standards that others spend decades trying to meet. Looking ahead, the RC213V's lessons will echo in every new Honda that rolls out of the factory gates. The integration of hybrid control systems, adaptive electronics, and new aerodynamic philosophies can all trace their roots back to this singular machine. It forced Honda and MotoGP itself to confront what happens when perfection meets impermanence. And that's why the RC213V's story endures long after its victories faded from the leaderboard. At its core, the RC213V wasn't built to be comfortable or forgiving or even accessible. It was built to prove a point, that the limits of performance are defined not by technology alone, but by the humans brave enough to command it. That's why its name still carries weight in paddocks, museums, and the memories of those who saw it fly down a straightaway. Both wheels trembling, engines screaming in defiance of gravity. The Honda RC213V may never be replicated, but its influence will never fade. It remains the ultimate expression of what happens when engineering and courage collide, and the world leans in to watch. Enduring, untamable, and unforgettable, the RC213V is proof that even the most advanced machines are still powered by something purely human: the will to go faster, no matter the cost.